Welcome back to San Diego State. We're still in Hardy Tower. We're only about 50 feet from my lab, but right now we're going to emphasize that archaeology is everywhere. And this is a strange story because 20 years ago when I interviewed for a job here, the faculty asked me where I wanted to dig. And I told them about the Harrison site on Palomar Mountain, and they were very excited about that. And I told them about digging at the Whaley House in Old Town. They were very excited about that. And then I said I also wanted to dig here on campus. And let me tell you that interview suddenly wasn't going so well because they were so puzzled why I'd want to dig here. And my response was that history's everywhere, archaeology's everywhere. The faculty really weren't sold on that. Fortunately, they hired me anyway, but then flash forward a few years, and that's when I got a call that there was something hidden behind these lowered ceiling tiles. And what we ended up finding here was a 30-foot mural from the 1930s of the tuna fishing industry that was once in San Diego. San Diego was the tuna capital of the world from 1911 to 1976. What was so neat about this is it showed that these hidden treasures were everywhere. And that is the key to archaeology. That's the dual key, being curious and then being relentless in trying to find these things. So we were able to save two murals. There are actually two at right angles, a 30-foot one and an 8-foot one of NRA packages being delivered, the National Recovery Administration. We were able to pull those off of the wall and then put them on an aluminum face and transfer them over to the library where everyone can see them once the library's up and running again in post-COVID times. And you can see these 1930s campus treasures. But what's so interesting is when we were doing this process to save these murals, a woman by the name of Evelyn Cooperman, one of the smartest people I've met. She's written 2 trivia books on San Diego. She's a former San Diego librarian, and she told me there was another mural in this building, and it was of Alice in Wonderland. The problem is we couldn't find it anywhere. Clearly, it had either been built over or painted over. It's worth emphasizing these lowered ceiling tiles were put in the 1950s, and this building dates all the way back to the 1930s. So let me take you on a little trip here on finding the Alice in Wonderland mural. So we tried every single one of these ceiling tiles, crawling into space, trying to find this mural, and weren't having any luck. In fact, there's probably no place on this campus that I haven't crawled into at one time or another. But then we went into this stairwell, and it was all painted over, but we used infrared photography to check this wall, because what Evelyn told me was the Alice mural was around a window, and there just aren't that many windows in Hardy Tower where we are currently. So what we did is we used groundbreaking science. So this was all painted white. We couldn't see any of this. But we used infrared photography, and it started to show us these crazy outlines of very old paint. It also showed a crack in the wall, too, from some of the seismic activity. This mural is one of our spectacular treasures. It's from the late 1940s. It was painted by an individual, a man by the name of A.J. Lewis. He was a student here at San Diego State. He served in World War II. He came back to State on the GI Bill, and he painted this masterpiece. If you look at the detail in this mural, it's so much fun. You get to see Alice looking down the rabbit hole. You get to see the rabbit. If you look closely, you can see the terror in the rabbit's eyes as he's falling down the rabbit hole. His pocket watch here. The rabbit's always saying, "I'm late, I'm late." We have chess pieces. The Queen of Hearts here. They're playing croquet using the swans and flamingos as their mallets. The Jabberwocky. Part of the story of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass is this large dragon figure. We even have the Cheshire Cat in the top left corner, and that individual with the hat way up there, that is the Mad Hatter. We have all the main characters of Alice in Wonderland. What was so fun about this is knowing the history of Alice in Wonderland and seeing it come back into play for people on campus. So Alice in Wonderland was written after the US Civil War. It was written by an Englishman, and it captured the fantasy of Americans. They absolutely loved the story after this very difficult time period. What's fascinating is then Disney releases the Alice in Wonderland movie movie in the 1950s after another war, and it again captivates a new generation of Americans who fall in love with this story. And that's when Albert Lewis is painting this. When we start looking at the process of saving this mural, that's where science came into effect again, because we had to peel off very old layers of paint, but we had to preserve some of the other layers as well. Painstaking, and it's that same kind of excavation where we actually had the conservator, he used Q-tips and go one stroke at a time to save this magnificent mural that's now preserved for everyone to see. Now, Albert J. Lewis is still alive. He's very old and he does have dementia, and when we showed this to him, I wasn't sure if it resonated with him. His daughter, his granddaughter were here and they absolutely loved it, and we had a big public ceremony, but I wasn't sure how much it spoke to him. And then one of the best stories I know of is later in the day he told his caretaker, "They found my rabbit." And it's one of my favorite stories. It gives me goosebumps every time I tell this story. And so we've been able to save this mural. This is the 6th mural that we've saved on campus, and we have murals from the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, the 70s, and the 90s. And it tells this story that's so interesting because it's not just about saving these paintings, but all of these paintings were done by students while they were students at San Diego State. And it gives us a little glimpse into what it was like to be a student, what it was like for somebody to return to San Diego after serving in World War II and creating this art. Now, you may ask yourself, is this really archaeology? You know, when you think of archaeology, when you think of artifacts, you think of little busted pieces of glass and the metal that Natalia was working on, and the different pipe stems and cans that Jamie showed you. Well, I'd give you a slightly different definition of archaeology. It could be anything that people modified as long as they disposed of it. So the punchline is, if somebody paints over something or throws something away, discards of it, well, then it's mine. Then it's the realm of the archaeologist. We get everything that has been lost and tossed away by past civilizations. We collect those things, we inventory those things, and that's how we learn about people of the past.
That's amazing. Seth, can you hear us okay?
Any questions on this mural?
Yeah, Seth, can you hear me okay?
I mean, that was
just barely. We're going to have the question related.
You guys head down
Fire
toward the
away,
speakers, and I'll start asking the question. We had a cake here that didn't go that well today. As you're lifting up ceiling tiles and not finding anything, and then you're lifting up other ceiling tiles, not finding anything, like at what point do you get discouraged and give up, and what's it feel like to finally find the rabbit? Oh, that was too long of a question to relay.
Finding the rabbit was so emotional. Just listening to
It
that.
really was.
It was so emotional. It was beautiful.
How do you keep going when you don't find it?
Yeah, so it's a great question of how do you keep going when you don't find anything? And that's where it's worth emphasizing that these archaeological projects, you don't start by knowing where something is. It really is all about, one of the key phrases in archaeology is moving from the known to the unknown. Is you start by using the existing records, using the stories that people tell, and then eliminating those options that prove to not be your answer. It's a lot like Sherlock Holmes in terms of eliminating the impossible, and whatever you're left with is the possible. So for me, it was funny because if we can show that door over there, that's actually a false wall. That's from the 1950s and 60s. And there was a while where that wall was really confusing for us until you realize that it's a much later construction. And once we put that out of our head, then it made more sense on where this mural was. There weren't that many spots that had windows like this, that had the same 3/3 configuration that Evelyn had talked to us about. But at the same time, it's also worth just trusting people. What I've found is that people's memories, they're pretty good. They're never exactly right, but people don't tend to totally make stuff up. And so when we're basing it on what someone has anecdotal evidence of, We tend to trust their memories. It would just shift in a certain area. Hardy Tower is one of these buildings on campus, and just about every campus has one that is a big maze. Hardy Tower is our maze, and there are all sorts of nooks and crannies. But it was one of the most spectacular discoveries, especially when we found the Mad Hatter. If you look closely, we had to cut the ceiling back. The ceiling angles up right by the Mad Hatter, and we did that so we could recapture the Cheshire Cat and the Mad Hatter itself. But Mike, to answer your question most simply, sometimes it just takes archaeological faith. You just keep digging and digging until you find what you set out to find.
Yeah. Wow.
Hashtag archaeology faith right there. Right there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Seth, interesting to hear you guys talk about the archaeology being the discarded and the trash. I think we'll hear more about that when we see you guys in a few minutes.